young photographers that ask me, Corey, like, what's the path to doing this? And so often they want to talk about their business plan and their website. And I always come back to this. No, like, here's the secret sauce is go out every single day and shoot, like, put yourself in that situation as often as possible.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Well, first off, Corey, thank you so very much for joining us here on The Art of Awesome. We've known each other for, I don't even know if it's been decades now. I feel like the first time I was on a shoot with you, and yeah, just stoked to have you here on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks a bunch. That was a long time ago. It's amazing how time passes, but gosh, we've both gotten older and wiser, hopefully.
Well, arguable about whether or not I'm wise or not, but definitely older, which is good. But Corey, you're arguably one of the, in my world anyway, one of the most accomplished photographers that I know. You've shot for pretty much, a flurry of the largest brand names out there and pretty much all of the biggest athletes and definitely all the biggest adventure athletes out there in the world. Though, how did it kind of start for you? How did you kind of get into photography? Was it something with a childhood or kind of just take us a little bit back to how it all started?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for the kind words. I mean, I pinch myself every day. I kind of wake up every day in fear that someone's going to figure out that I haven't worked a day in my life yet, uh, because I just absolutely love what I do, and I genuinely mean that. I feel like 99.9% of the time I get up and I'm excited to get out of bed and start work, quote unquote, in quotes, working. But gosh, it just doesn't feel like work. And I think, I hope the reason I say that is I think that's all of us. That's what we strive to do, right? Is figure out what just gets us freaking fired up all the time and do that as often as possible. And if you can somehow manage trick people into paying you to do that, then you've really nailed it. And so, but my journey started when I was pretty young. I was 13 years old and I was a gymnast. I was a pretty competitive gymnast. And we had a pull-up contest at our junior high school. And I did 35 pull-ups. I won the pull-up contest. And one of my PE teachers invited me to go climbing. He took notice of the short, strong kid. And that next weekend I went climbing. My older brother and I went with two teachers from our school, Bob Porter and George Egbert. And that was the most transformative weekend of my life. I fell in love with everything about climbing. I loved the sort of physical challenge, the mental challenge, just the scenic beauty of where we were. But I didn't realize it. Not only had I fallen in love with climbing, I got back to the schoolyard on Monday morning and I stood there and I tried to tell my story of weekend adventures to my friends. And I quickly realized that I needed visual proof of like what I had just done. And so I borrowed my dad's SLR camera, and that next weekend went climbing with my brother and my two school teachers. And I realized that my photos were awful. My dad had a pretty nice camera, but my photos were awful. And within, a week, literally like from a Saturday to a Saturday, two passions were born: a passion for both climbing and a passion for photography or storytelling. And then I started these kind of lifelong pursuits at 13, which was I tried to hone the craft of photography and I tried to spend as much time outside rock climbing, which really over time that expanded into, it wasn't just rock climbing, it was having adventures, right? It was having adventures and photography. I still on my business card, although I don't have a business card anymore, it used to say photographer, but now it's storyteller. So much of what I realized over the last 30 years, what I actually do is I'm a storyteller. And sometimes that's with photography, sometimes that's with video, sometimes it's both. But I still love more than anything sitting around a campfire and weaving a yarn and telling an oral story the same way I used to do sitting on that, standing on that playground on Monday morning after going on a climbing trip.
Well, I totally agree with everything that you've just said. And most certainly I would say you are a storyteller because your photos, that's exactly what they do, is they do tell a story. And I've got your book over here, Stories Behind the Images, which again is an amazing book. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But you kind of started in photography, like you were saying, then you got more into video and stuff like that as well, and just kind of storytelling, all encompassing. What do you find easier or harder, I guess, between the two different mediums for telling a story, between maybe shooting a photo versus creating a video?
Yeah, I mean, I love both. I have to say, I go through kind of phases where all I want to do is shoot video, and then I get a little cooked on video, and then all I want to do is shoot photos. There's a simplicity to shooting photos, that's for sure. I think the beauty, one of the original things I fell in love with, one of the attributes of still photography is it's just simple. You can have a single camera and a single lens, and you can it's about that 1/1000th of a second. It's very nuanced. You have a rectangle, it's either turned horizontally or vertically, and you make minute adjustments to the composition, and you position yourself so that the light is most interesting, and then you decide when you depress that shutter, and that's it. Like, you have one frame to communicate whatever it is you're trying to communicate, to wow your audience, move your audience, make them cry. But it's hard, don't get me wrong. It's very easy to take a picture. It's very hard to make a great picture. I always joke that in my career, I haven't shot that many great pictures. I've shot millions of photos over my career, and there's not that many that are great. A lot of good ones. Like, I get hired to make good pictures all the time. Great pictures, those are pretty few and far between. I don't know what the hit ratio is. For every 1,000 good pictures, maybe there's one great picture. And to make a good picture, you shoot, 10,000 mediocre pictures. So I don't know what that ratio is, like 10,000 shutter depressions to get, one good picture. Or I don't know. You understand where I'm going.
Yeah.
1,000 good, then another 1,000 to get to great. So, the odds, it's really hard to get to good. But that's that pursuit, and I think any athlete can appreciate this. Any artist can appreciate that. It's getting to really great, which is, for me, it's actually the most enjoyable aspect. I always say that I'm a guy that's more about the journey than to arrive. I'm not actually like a super competitive guy. It's not for me. I guess I would liken it to, in sport, it's like you want to stand on the center podium, and in photography, you want to nail those great pictures. But I have to say, it's all of the paddle strokes. I'm going to use the analogy of water. I just love continuously paddling. I just love the daily process, the procedure of refining my skill set. It's sort of, I enjoy the journey more than I do arriving. I mean, I feel really good when I make a great picture, when every now and again that happens. It's, inside I do a little fist pump. But the journey is what it's really about. That's what lasts forever. And the great memories come from the journey. But, to get back to your question, it's video versus still photography. One of the things I learned, it's kind of with you actually, and Dane, when we did that project for Nikon, the Y project, where we were all down in Mexico.
Yep.
That was my first real, substantial video project. And, I was definitely a fish out of water. We were figuring it out, myself and the team, it was way over our head. We were kind of, just barely hanging on, figuring out how to pull that off, but with a lot of passion and a great group of guys. But one of the things I learned on that project was the beauty of video is you get to work with the team. It's pretty rarely it's just you. With photography, it's just me and the subject. If you and I go on an expedition somewhere, it's, I'm photographing Nick, and, I'm running around either in a boat or I'm paddling, running along the side of the river. And it's it's just an interaction between you and I. And as soon as there's video at a high level, it tends to not be one person. It tends to be, I might be directing or I might be shooting, but then we have another camera operator and we have an assistant, we've got a sound guy. And all of a sudden there's camaraderie. And when you gather a group of really creative people who are passionate and everybody shares that same philosophy, to travel hopefully is better than to arrive. You're around kindred spirits, and you have the memories are richer. You just have this experience where you're not alone on a train or a bus or a plane or sleeping in your tent alone. You're actually now with a team of people that you get to share this with. And it's, I think my attraction to outdoor adventure sports is, one, I find I'm the most creative when I'm a participant, when I'm sort of engaged in the activity and my heart's beating at 150 beats per second and some sweats in my eye and I'm a little scared because, I'm worried about the avalanche danger above or the rock fall. And so, that's like checkbox number one. I need to be a participant. That's when I'm having like the best experience. And that means I'm I have a close relationship with the athlete that I'm photographing or the athletes, and I'm in that communication loop. We're together making decisions. But then the next tier is beyond that, the absolute core group is myself and the athletes that I'm photographing. And that's, I've become a better person because I get to spend time around guys like you that perform at that highest level and think differently. And then that next tier is when it's video, it's not just the myself, the photographer with the athletes. Now it's the athletes and the little video community. And it makes when it's the right team, it's kind of the ultimate experience. It's really everyone's pushing themselves, athletes pushing on the, athletic front, filmmaking crew pushing on the creative front, trying to like think outside of the box. There's camaraderie, and just memories that are formed as a group, and that's early in this conversation. I kind of joked that I can't believe that no one's figured out I haven't worked a day in my life, because I think you can relate to this. When it's that scenario, you're surrounded by your buddies. They're, your paddling buddies, and you're surrounded by a video crew or photographer that, they're your buddies but they're doing world-class work. That doesn't feel like work. I mean, that doesn't feel, it feels like we're getting paid to play and pursue passion and just do what we love. That we do what's fulfilling. And so, I don't know if I video or still photography, if one is kind of a more valuable or more important to me, or I love one more. I will say I just go through phases, and right now I'm in like a big video phase. We're doing tons of video production, and I have to admit, I get to the point where, the crews get bigger and bigger and bigger. We just had 60 people on a set.
Wow.
And it's huge. And it's like, and there's enormous amounts of pre-production, spent literally weeks doing pre-production, everything from concepting the creative to storyboards and all the logistics and schedules down to every 15 minutes, what are we going to do? And the logistics of the lighting crew and the sound team and the team that's going to upload the video so that in real time remote clients can see it, and the hair and makeup and the styling and the wardrobe and the talent and the locations. And it's like a puzzle that you get to put together. And I love that challenge of like, okay, how are we going to make these pieces work? And I'm working with an incredible team. The producer that I worked with, Amelia Richmond, she's incredible. But then at the end of that, it's a success. And then I do have this like desire, I crave, God, I just want to go and take some pictures, where it's just I throw a camera and 2 lenses in my backpack, and I go and ski with my buddies who happen to be really good skiers. And it's real simple. We're going to get up at 5 a.m, put on headlamps, start skinning. And when the sun starts coming up, I'm going to make pictures. And so, I think there's just this balance that I need the logistical mental challenge of shooting video, and of course I'm leaving out, there's also this post-production process. We shot video for 4 days, and now I'm in a massive production, and now we're going to edit that down to 90 seconds, the smartest 90 seconds that we can. And that's going to take another 2 months. And so it's, switching gears. That's what I find. It's like I shift from, okay, now I'm in the logistics managerial phase mode. Now switch gears. Now I'm a photographer. Switch gears. Now I'm a post-production supervisor and editor. And I need to think about the narrative and the storyline and the music. And I love, I guess all of that is to say, I kind of like shifting gears and kind of putting on a different ball cap depending on, what that day calls for.
It's funny because I have a very similar, I guess, mindset in just paddling in general, in the sense that, like, some days I really want to go run waterfalls, or I want to go on like a major expedition and just go like explore and have an adventure. And then you do that enough and it gets like scary enough, or like, there's enough life-threatening situations where you're like, I just want to go do something super chill and just like go play boat at like a whitewater park and like go get a hamburger afterwards or something like that. And then like you just go through these like waves, like ebbs and flows of like what you're craving at the moment. And I mean, I couldn't do any one thing, forever. I've got to kind of just weave in and out of like these different variations. And again, sometimes too, it's like, I want to get out of my boat and I want to go bike, or I want to go ski or surf or do whatever. And so it's funny how you have the same thing, just like within photography and video creation as well.
Yeah, and hearing you say that also makes me. I mean, I have that same kind of dilemma, internal dilemma, or conversation with myself around when it comes to the subject matter that I'm shooting. My world is really split. My roots are in adventure sports. I mean, it's definitely how I sharpened my teeth. It's what I'm most passionate about. It's who I am as a person. It's what I do in my free time, whether there's a camera in my hand or not. But then meanwhile, like the way that I make money and pay my mortgage for the most part today is honestly has almost nothing to do with adventure sports. We're working for, as you said, giant brands, the biggest in the world, the Apples, the Googles, the Amazons of the world. And it's still storytelling and it's still super creative. But in the adventure sports world, I guess just in the subject matter that I'm responsible for photographing or filming, I also need that mix that you're describing. I'm super excited to do like a big ad campaign, tell a story about technology or education. But then I crave a few times a year, I need to go on an expedition where it's super uncomfortable and scary, and where the outcome is uncertain. That's the true definition of adventure. And, but then mixed in between all of that, there's the expeditions on this end, the big commercial shoots on this side. And then right in the middle, I just need a lot of skinning up the mountain to take a photo at 6:30 a.m. when the light's nice. And then I'm home with my daughter and wife. And then we go skiing or hiking or mountain bike. So I think it's that like mixologist, the mixology of life. Like, what's that correct balance? And, that for me, that balance now at, 45 years old, the balance is, I need to do some really creatively challenging, logistically challenging jobs that pay but are super satisfying. I need to do a few expeditions a year where, whether that's for 3 days or a month, where it's scary as hell and like it's uncomfortable and you're cold and wet and the outcome's uncertain. And I'm still shooting photos and video, but I'm probably not making much money. I might even be losing money in the scheme of things. And then right in the middle is it's the day to day. I just still need to be outside every day with my camera, with my friends or my family, making pictures and video of just the stuff that I love to do. And as you said, eating a burger afterwards.
Yeah, and maybe a beer or something like that too. But
yeah, hamburgers. Yeah.
yeah. So you've been on I couldn't even like briefly mention all the rad trips and expeditions and adventures that you've been on, and all the different athletes that you've worked with and the camaraderie and stuff like that. Like, there's obviously a bond and a connection and a friendship there. Not only that, but like, you must be worried for them at some points, because like some of the stuff that you're documenting is pretty rowdy stuff, like pretty rowdy feats and accomplishments within, the extreme or adventure sports athletics on its own. And then most of the time as well, you're like, harnessed into some cliff or just like whatever, like where your life is kind of on the line as well. How do you kind of balance, I guess, or is there like that fear for both the athlete and for yourself? Like, how does that kind of all, blend together a little bit in creating these moments?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, it's worth saying that, I consider the people that I photograph genuinely really great friends. I mean, some of my best friends, of course, are the people that I've photographed, some of whom happen to be fantastic athletes. And I've always had this rule, like, I don't work with assholes. I mean, I really sort of, life's too short. If it's grind, and this hasn't happened very often in life, that I find myself in a situation where I'm like, God, I just can't tolerate this person. We're just not seeing on the same wavelength. We're not marching to the same beat. I just try to end that. Like I want to really, it goes back to the journey. I want to go and have a journey with people that I really enjoy, and we laugh at the same jokes, and get scared at the same times, and can have honest conversations about the risk. But it's safe to say that I really love the people that I work with, and I care deeply about them, and they're friends. They're not just colleagues. I mean, they're as close to family as it gets.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly really having that internal conversation with me, and I verbalize it with with the athletes I'm photographing when there's real risk involved. I mean, we have a conversation about it up front, or in the moment, what this feels like. It's you're sort of, everyone's climbed back into their boats, they've scouted this huge waterfall or drop, and it's like everybody understands, whether you've said it or not, like everybody acknowledges like what the potential risk is. And you've got, at least in the, maybe you verbalized it, maybe you haven't, what's the plan, like the triage plan if the shit hits the fan. And everyone's sort of buzzing, but you're on that same wavelength. And I'm a guy that no photograph is worth dying for. That's for sure. I mean,
Right.
or even getting hurt. Like I just realized last week I was skiing with my daughter and another family, and just having, I mean, really a mellow day at the ski resort. And I was just goofing around and did this jump, like aired off some little lip, and tried to grab my skis to make all the kids laugh. And I don't know what happened, but I exploded out of my skis and did like a front flip and cartwheeled, and the ski flew off. And I don't know what happened, but I feel like I broke one of my ribs,
Oh,
and it's
no.
just super sore. And on one level I was fine. I mean, I didn't, not, I can still walk and ski, but it hurts. I just woke up, this morning thinking like, oh man, my ribs really hurt. And that's a huge inconvenience. Like, I don't like being hurt. I like being healthy so that I can do this every day. Right. I'm just I'm a guy that's about repetition. And so, the idea of getting hurt or dying, it's just not an option. Like I do everything in my power to avoid that. Yet, I say I do everything in my power to avoid that, but every now and again, we collectively get into these situations where it's like, okay, the option of going back, that's gone. Like, we can't do that. There's no other way out except, this way, down the river, down the mountain. And then it's in the most calculated, measured way, because I'm not a world-class athlete. I'm an athlete. I love being outside, and I spend a lot of time. You're a professional athlete. Like the athletes that I'm photographing, you guys have something magical in you that you can step it up 6 notches when you need to. And I'm in like survival mode all the time when I'm with you guys. It's sort of, okay, like I belong here, I'm safe, but I'm just doing everything in a very calculated way. And I'm going to use, the river. I'm not a boater, but I'm not going to drop the same waterfall that you guys do. I'm going to set up a rope and rappel down, or I'm going to hike around the side.
Yeah.
And so it's always, I guess it's always measured. Like my goal is, do not get hurt. Definitely don't die. Yeah, as it applies to me. And I'm having open conversations with the athletes in the field about how to do that. It's, if I'm going to photograph you drop some huge waterfall, it's like, you and I are going to have a ton of conversation around, and I'm competent, I'm a guy, I'm going to be honest. I'm not trying to hide anything. It's like, Nick, what do you think? How should I do this? Where should I be? How do I get there? And oftentimes I need the athlete's help to get myself into those positions. There's things I just can't do. In the climbing world, that's certainly the case. When I'm working with, world-class climber, they just have an ability to get into locations, to kind of move the rope into locations that, maybe I could do it, but it would take, hours and hours, and they can do it in 5 minutes. And it's like, boom, rope is set. But then it's like, after I'm in position and I feel like I'm not going to die or get seriously hurt, then there's a conversation, both internally, but also, verbally with the athletes I'm photographing around. They're going to do what they want to do. I mean, obviously you're on a mission all the time as a professional athlete, but it's like, I always, when we get into that zone where like risk is high, I'm the first to just remind them, even though I think everyone knows, don't do anything for me just because there's a camera here. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Like, we can come back in a year. We don't need to shoot this. It's, that by no means do you need to do this because there should never be pressure. And I think it's safe to say that I've never put an athlete in a situation where they're feeling extra pressure because I'm there. I mean, it's something that, sure, are we all disappointed when we fly around the world and hike for 3 days and, wait out the weather, and then eventually, like, we still can't do it because it's
Yeah.
too dangerous or the conditions are wrong. Yeah, it's a huge bummer. But, it's safe to say that half the trips that I've ever done end that way. And it's fine. And guess what? We're all alive,
Yeah.
to talk about it afterwards. So,
But
I guess the moral is there's just nothing that's ever worth, like, truly, dying over or
Yeah.
seriously hurt.
And I think that probably just also speaks to the fact that you're working with professionals, both the fact that you are a professional yourself, that you're willing to, fly across the world, hike in 3 days and still not get the shot, but also work with professional athletes that aren't going to put their lives, too far out on the line either. Because I've also seen, and I see it more, I guess, with younger athletes that as soon as you take a camera out of a bag or something like that and you go to shoot, whether it's, video or photo or whatever, they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to step it up. I'm going to go, run this waterfall or try something harder. And you're like, well, okay. We need to now step aside and go have a talk because like you're now doing it for the wrong reasons. And that's where injuries and things go wrong, is when you start doing something because you're trying to like, oh, I'm just going to do this because I want the photo or the video proof now. If we weren't doing that, I wouldn't, put myself in that situation. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously that's not necessarily something that you deal with that much because I think you're working with these professional athletes, but
Yeah, I mean, one thing that happens or has happened over the years, and you can relate to this, when you get into those radical situations, right? It's that super remote waterfall or that, that cliff out in the middle of nowhere where we're going to shoot. There's oftentimes, you spend a lot of time hanging out in camp at the campfire, planning what's going to happen, both from an athletic perspective, but also from a photographic or storytelling perspective. And there's a ton of dialogue that happens between, I'm just going to keep it simple when I'm a photographer, between me and the athlete or athletes. Should I do it? Is this going to work? And it's, there is a point at which, I'm going to put you in this category. The world just looks different to you than it does to me. I mean, you have this nuanced, deep understanding of paddling that I don't have. And it's, but I spend a lot of time around rivers and a lot of time around, mountains. And I'll often I'm in this conversation with an athlete, and it's around, is this worth it? Like, is this going to work? Is this? And I think I owe it to the athlete, and I think the athlete is asking me to give them feedback. It's that kind of 10,000 hour rule. You end up in enough of these kind of remote expedition style scenarios where you can kind of look at what's about to happen and say, like, is this a recipe for disaster, or is this going to go down? Is this, but again, and so I'm oftentimes providing my editorial opinion in the days leading up to it. And then, in the months leading up to the trip, and then the weeks leading up to packing our bags. And then when we're there staring up at the rock wall, or we're hanging below that pitch, there's this constant dialogue around, like, God, is that flake going to peel off? Is there a risk of this cutting our ropes? Is this worth it with the storm coming in? And I've learned I'll voice my opinion, but I also understand that there's like, I'm sort of the expert in the storytelling world, and the athlete is the expert in that you have that extra amount of knowledge and insight, and you can dig deep and you understand, is this worth it? Like, can I pull this off? And I've learned over the years to really always stop short of, I'll voice my opinion, but then it's like, Nick, man, you got to make the final call. There's no pressure one way or the other. Yeah. And so often, I watch whatever the athletic endeavor, when I finally watch it happen, it's sort of, there's this magic that unfolds where it's sort of, a world-class athlete has this ability to enter, what many call the flow state, and sort of, despite all the planning and travel and conversation and debate and nuance, it's like, then flip a switch and switch out of the conversation mode into the get it done mode. and perform at the highest level. And that's super admirable. I love watching that. That's when the best pictures get made, actually. It's
That,
when it
that
finally goes silent and there's no longer conversation. It's like, I'm where I'm supposed to be. The athletes where they're supposed to be. It's like the moment to make it happen and dig deep and, sort of focus. And, we spend weeks and weeks to get to that moment for 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, where athlete enters the flow state. Maybe to some degree, I enter a similar state to kind of, really capture that moment. And that's what it's all about. It's about getting into those, really finite time slots, it's limited time, and it only happens occasionally. But those are that's as special as it gets.
The flow state's something that we talk about a fair amount on this podcast, and something that I'm super interested in. And maybe it's because I've, had my moments in the flow state, and therefore it's a very intriguing subject and thought of mine. And just thinking about it, it must be amazing for you because you get to document so much of that. Where that's exactly what you're saying, where all this lead up, all this build up goes into creating that moment where you're watching these athletes in that flow state, but you're also seeing it in a variety of different environments and sports, and then you're also tapping into it yourself with your own creativity and creating the moment. It must be this really cool blend of like watching someone in the flow state as well as like kind of being in the flow state yourself. It's super cool. And that actually, just verbally thinking about that, makes so much more sense now when I look through your images, and I'm just like, man, like Corey's obviously an amazing photographer. Like every image I think is just, world class, like just top of the game. But that must be it's this blend of like flow state as a creator, and then a flow state, and then watching someone else in their own flow state as well. It's super cool.
That's right. It has to be synchronized. That's kind of the key. I think there's a synchronization of, it turns out, and I've never thought about this, if I've, flipped through that book, and, in that book, there's a few images I would consider my great images, that I'm really proud of, the really rare images, and then a lot of good images that made the book. But I would speculate that those images that are the truly great images in the book, that was the synchronization of, we were both in a flow state at the same time, meaning the athlete was its peak performance in that moment, present, and I was in that same space as a creative. And when it happens simultaneously, the odds of being at that higher level of performance, higher level of content creation, I think that the odds are higher. And it's a muscle memory thing. The more times you do it, right, the more often you're there, the more often you're in that space, allowing that opportunity to present itself, I think the more great pictures I make. And so it's one thing that I always remind young photographers that ask me, Corey, like, what's the path to doing this? And so often they want to talk about their business plan and their website. And I always come back to this, no, like, here's the secret sauce is go out every single day and shoot, like, put yourself in that situation as often as possible, where really, I mean, you're putting yourself in that situation to create muscle memory, but also to get to that point where there's that synchronization of the subject you're shooting is in a flow state, you're in a flow state. And when that happens, that's the magic. But guess what? You can't schedule that. That's the catch. Like, you can't just say, hey, on Tuesday at 10 a.m., Nick, can I meet you at the river and, do something amazing, and I'll be in like the right headspace, and the light's going to be incredible. It just takes repetition. Like, it takes, go to the river a bunch of times to finally get that trick dialed. And it's, I as a visual content creator, I have to go to the river a bunch of times to both be in the right mental state where the light's right, and you've got to be in the right mental state. And that's hard. Like, that takes repetition. You can't just, it's not every Tuesday at 2:00 that happens.
I imagine that's too also why you work a lot of the times with similar or the same athletes, in the sense, because you know that you can synchronize well with that person. And it goes back to the fact that you don't want to work with assholes. But the idea that, like, once you start, that you can work well with someone, kind of like how they might be like about to get into flow, or like how they're going to just like assess and deal with the situation. It might be easier for you then to kind of line up on your end to kind of tap into the flow and have that synchronization moment?
I think it's like any relationship. It's, in the same way that you and Emily can communicate well because you've communicated for, you've been married for 13 years and known each other. How long have you guys known each other now? Gosh.
Gosh, longer than 13 years. I mean, we met the very first time. I think we were like 8 or 10, or we met super young. Yeah, and then we've been friends since, I don't know, maybe I was like 13 or 14, and then yeah, so a
Wow.
long time.
I mean, and I use that example of, you know, you guys are, she's one of your oldest friends.
Yeah,
And now you're married, but it's like you guys are expert communicators and you enjoy each other's company. And so I think that's the spirit of, I work with the same athletes, one, because they're just really good friends, great friends, like some of my best friends, but also because we're just good at communicating. We've spent a lot of time, that's part of that. Like it just works, it's sort of we fit together in terms of the way we communicate. And I think you're right. It reduces the friction, minimizes the friction in terms of getting to a place where you can both perform at a high level.
hmm
And it's fun. You can appreciate when, the more time you spend with friends, the more stories you have and the more experiences and the more kind of you can relate to in each other's lives. And, that's outside of even making a picture or performing at a high level. That's fun. That's what life's all about is sharing those life experiences and telling those stories and, checking in on one another.
Yeah,
One thing I find is, I don't know if you feel this way, Nick, it's just life. Once you have a kid, you're just busy. It's like,
yeah,
I feel less time. Like there's less idle time to just be hanging out. And so I find, even some of my best friends, I just don't have as much time with them because, they're busy with their families and their careers. But I do find, those friends that where we're close, and I feel like we're doing it here a bit. It's this idea that, 5 years can pass, 10 years can pass, but you just pick up right where you left off.
yeah.
The conversation just kicks right in where you left off, and it's as though no time was lost. It's a quick catch up, and I think that's it. That comes from, shared values and, shared passion for adventure and shared passion for sport and storytelling. And that's what I'm craving every day is, picking up those conversations where they left off and having new genuine adventures as often as possible.
That's amazing for sure. And just, I mean, talking about sharing stories and passion and all that kind of stuff. So we mentioned it a little bit earlier about your book, Stories Behind the Images. But to me, like flipping through it is just, it really is awe-inspiring because it's obviously a book filled with just incredible images, but it's almost like, I mean, obviously you write the stories behind it, but it's like a behind the scenes, look into these kind of, legendary photos, and you get to learn a lot more about you as the photographer, but also just like the athletes themselves and kind of what might be going on to create that incredible moment. How did you kind of like, where did the idea come up for this almost like behind the scenes version of these awesome photos?
Yeah, I think it was born out of just, I always say that if I weren't a photographer, I'd be a teacher. Like my dad was a school teacher. I owe the introduction to climbing to two school teachers. Really, I owe my, introduction to photography to school teachers and sort of me evolving as a photographer to a few more school teachers. And so, teachers have played a huge part in my life. I mean, I think they're some of the most amazing, giving people on the planet. I mean, they're there for other people to help kids grow, to help shape young minds. And I've just always loved the act of sharing. I mean, sort of, rolling up my sleeves and really explaining things to people and sharing my philosophy and like watching people excel and grow. And to this day, it's one of my favorite, I'm a little more disciplined about it now. I used to, anytime I was invited to teach at a workshop, my answer was yes. And now I just have less time. It goes back to like, I need to pay a mortgage. I have a, daughter and a wife and I want to stay healthy. And so I do less one-on-one teaching where I go to workshops with a small group of people, but I love doing it. Like, I really love watching people grow and the light bulb go off in their head, and just that evolution. And so that's really the spirit of the book. I over time, I used to do a lot of workshops where it was small groups, very personal. And then I realized, wait, the economy of scale doesn't work here. I only have so much time. It's hard to go and, give a week to 10 people. And so then I started exploring like some of these online teaching scenarios where I teach a class for a week, but it reaches 25,000 people at once, or, over the life of the class. And that felt, while it was less personal, it felt like I was actually having a greater effect on more people.
Yep.
And the book is a version of that. This isn't the typical photo coffee table book. I really want for it to be a hardcover book. I wanted it to be soft cover so you can read it like a magazine. I don't think anyone has ever read a photo book in the history of the world, the hardcover oversized, which you can't even keep the pages open. So I don't even know why there's text in the book, because it's almost impossible to read. I mean, I say that jokingly, but I wanted this to be a book that people actually read. It's less about the photos, more about the stories. And really the spirit of the book is paying it forward. It's sort of sharing anecdotal tales of both my successes and failures and what I did wrong, but also kind of, telling the stories of the incredible athletes and people that I've had a chance to work with over the years. And, it's sharing. That's really what this book is about. And I hope that it's entertaining. I mean, because if it's just, clinical in terms of process, that's boring. If I couldn't read it, then it's not worth publishing. It's like, you've got to be entertained. These essays are usually pretty self-deprecating because I've made a lot of mistakes, but that's the spirit. It's to pay it forward. And it's, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, I also want my daughter to get a sense of like who I was.
Yeah.
And I think the book does a pretty good job of, it's not sugar coated. It's a pretty accurate representation of who I am, how I think. And I hope that inspires, if one person picks up this book and it changes their life, like it opens doors for them, then this book was worth it. All the effort was worth it.
That's amazing. And first off, if anybody hasn't seen this book or read this book, I highly encourage everybody to go get a copy. Stories Behind the Images. It really is amazing. And I love the fact that it's like one just world-class photo, and then it's just the full essay written, like the story behind it, where it's not like all these photos mixed in between the text and stuff like that. It's like, no, here's the photo and then here's the story. And it is a really cool read. And it is, I don't know, there is that depth. There is that like behind the scenes truth that goes on with all the images. And so I think you did a great job with it, Corey. And I personally enjoyed it a ton, and I highly encourage anybody else to go check it out as well.
Thanks a ton.
No worries. So you've kind of been obviously around the photography scene for a while. You've, probably started with actual film, and then kind of as
cabinets behind me are full of film. That's that's all the old slides. Yeah,
that's cool. And then there's like the evolution into digital, and then more video creation, and now kind of like social media and how that all kind of plays into it. How do you, I guess, where do you see like the world of photography kind of going from here? And obviously you've been adapting the whole way. Like, what's kind of next for you?
Well, I think we're living in like, the golden age of communication. When I grew up, when I was emerging as a photographer and filmmaker, magazines and newspapers, that was it. Like, you tried to get your pictures in magazines and newspapers, which meant you had to go through some photo editor and a publisher, and you hoped that your image made the cut and that they decided it was worthy of publication. And you were dependent on that publication to communicate with your audience at large. That, magazines and newspapers are all but gone. Like, they essentially don't exist. And today, it's we as the content creators have control over our audiences. We control the delivery mechanisms. Social media has completely transformed communication, and that's pretty exciting. I mean, what that means is that, the power of Instagram, for example, you can, I mean, you can channel content to the audience that you want to channel content to. It comes down to, though, having really great content. Like, that's what hasn't changed. It, like, the at the end all, like, the most important thing is great content gets attention. That was true at newspapers, that was true at magazines. If you shot the most amazing photograph or the best video, it got published, people noticed. And that same thing is true today with social media. There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of mediocre content that gets published, but if you're consistently creating good or great content, people notice and your audience grows, and it's the right audience because they care about that content. And that opens doors. If you have an audience, that opens doors to big commercial assignments, and it opened doors to really unique opportunities. So I think we've never been more empowered than today. I'm not saying it's easy, nor was it easy to get published all the time in magazines or newspapers. It's, the delivery mechanism have changed, but the power, like, the keys are in our hands now as content creators. It's no longer, we're not relying on a publisher and, that's 5 layers removed from us. You have to go through the intern to the picture editor to the managing editor to the publisher. That's done. That's a thing of the past. Now it's your password and your Instagram account. And if you feed that Instagram account enough and you have strategic alliances with brands and your audience grows, if I were an emerging photographer today or filmmaker, that's where my focus would be. My focus would be, I'm going to grow a huge audience on my social accounts. And that means I'm going to be out shooting every single day and creating better content than the other people out there trying to do it. And if you do that, there's no question the opportunities are huge. I mean, it's really, and never has the playing field been so level. Cameras are inexpensive. Editing tools we can edit videos on our phones. We can shoot on our phones. We can buy incredible mirrorless cameras for, $1,500, sub $1,000. Just it's never been more accessible. You don't have to own a $50,000 cinema camera to shoot a video. We can buy GoPros that mount on our helmets. We can, the tools are out there. Now it's just what you do up here. It's how you use your brain and how much heart you put into it. And, the potential is unlimited. I mean, my God, you buy a drone that allows you to create it. The tools, we have all of the tools now, and they're pretty affordable. The price of entry is lower than it has ever been before. But it's how much energy you're willing to put into it, how you hone your craft, how hard you're willing to work. And if you're willing to, go all in and you have some raw talent, the future is unbelievable.
That's amazing. Corey, you have just dropped so many nuggets of gold, as I like to say, and knowledge bombs right there. So anybody out there that wants to be a photographer, just like rewind a couple minutes and listen to that all again, because Corey pretty much just like laid it all out there for you. I also want to be cautious and thankful for the time that I've got here with you, Corey. So I'm going to move us on to the section and the last section of the show that I call our fire round. And I'm just going to fire a couple quick questions at you. Do you have a favorite quote that you live by?
I don't know where the quote came from, but it's 2. One is, it's like, if you want to dance, you've got to pay the piper. That's pretty good. It's just,
yeah.
And then I think the quote that I probably, remind myself of all the time that I really live by, Tom Frost, who is one of the pioneers of climbing. Tom used to always say, the definition of true adventure is where the outcome is uncertain. And
Love that.
And it's true, and I always talk to Layla about that, my daughter. Now let's go out and have an adventure. And she says, what's adventure? And I think she might not use that quote, but I think she could articulate what adventure is. It's when we don't know where the path goes, or we don't know, if it's going to keep on snowing on it. That, real adventure is pretty healthy for you.
That is amazing. Do you have a favorite book or current book that you're reading, or just anything that's kind of like inspired you along the way?
Yeah. I consume a ton of biographies and autobiographies. I just love watching and reading about and learning about how, amazing people think. And so usually it's whichever book I'm reading, but I'm a big audiobook guy. I'm listening to Obama's book right now, which is pretty good. Really impressive. It's his autobiography written by him and read by him. super it's fascinating, like interesting nuggets into what it means to be the president of the United States. But yeah, just I love biographies. I mean, it's pretty rare that I don't listen to a biography where I'm not just super inspired by one aspect of someone's life or another, and then take it and try to apply what I learned to myself.
That's amazing. That Obama's book is actually on my book list. So I'm definitely gonna have to, maybe I'll have to bump it up coming in the new year and get that a little bit closer for either reading or throw it on the audiobook list. Corey, if you could go back in time to any time in your life and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
What would that be? Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, boy, I don't know if there's I don't know what I would give my. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of constantly checking in with myself and have been around I'm constantly giving myself advice, like fine tuning what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I don't know if there's one bit of advice. Let me just, if I reposition the question, if I met a young person and they said, give me the best advice, and maybe someone gave me this advice, which is just do what you love as often as you can. I mean, that's really, I feel like that's advice that I have lived by. And it's maybe the best piece of advice I could give someone who's young is, cut out all the bullshit and just do the stuff that you love as often as you can.
I
That's
love
it.
that. I love that. Corey, thank you so very much for joining us today. This has just been absolutely incredible. You have given us just a ton of value, and obviously, you have just years of knowledge and experience under your belt. For anybody out there that wants to maybe connect with you or reach out, what might be the best way for someone to reach out to you?
Sure. Probably the two best ways, just coreyrich.com, COREYRICH.com. That's my website. I think from that website, you can get to all my social handles, which tend to be Corey Rich or Corey Rich Productions on all the social platforms. And then if you're interested in the book, you can go, we have a little micro site called stories at just storiesbehindtheimages.com, or you can buy it on Amazon. And yeah, I'll say I'm always happy to answer questions. Frequently, I'm slow to get back to questions because I'm busy. But there's a lot of information on my blog. If you go to coreyrich.com, there's a lot of back reading. And honestly, the book, I put a ton of energy into trying to answer the most common questions I get in writing that book. So if folks are really interested in kind of the backstory or becoming an evolved, a photographer, filmmaker, adventure sports, how it works, buy the book first. I mean, and it's also on Audible. So it's you can also get Stories Behind the Images as an audiobook on audible.com. But I'll warn you, I didn't read it. And I'm not a huge fan of the read, but hey, it's if that's how you like to consume books, so be it.
Cool. Well, there you go, guys. Definitely reach out on either social media, check out his blog, go to CoreyRich.com, and I highly encourage everybody to go take a look at that book. It is just truly incredible. I bet it would also be good as an audiobook, but I think you're definitely missing part of it if you don't get the visual part. So I would highly encourage you guys go on Amazon and buy this book because it really is incredible. Corey, I also try to add value myself within all these episodes. So what is maybe something that you are focusing on right now that maybe I could help you with, or maybe one of our listeners could help you out with as well?
Let's go on an expedition, Nick. Let's cook something up. Let's go when we're all allowed to travel again and it's safe, or maybe it's even domestic and we drive. Let's spin up some rad adventure where the outcome is uncertain.
Let's do that. I love that. Let's go do something where the outcome is uncertain. Thanks so much, Corey. Last question, final question of the day for you. What is your definition of awesome?
Mm. It's being in the moment. It's getting into that flow state when you sort of I mean, I kind of like when the snow is blowing in my face and I'm cold and a little scared, and that camera's coming up to my eye and I'm making some pretty amazing pictures and I'm creating memories with a person that I care deeply about. That's awesome.
That truly is awesome. Again, thank you so very much for your time, Corey. This has been truly incredible. I have gotten a ton of value personally. I hope you guys as listeners also got a ton of value out of this, as I truly believe Corey really just unfolded and laid out exactly a whole blueprint to become a professional photographer, to create amazing content, and to just enjoy and live your passion. So thank you so much for that. If you guys also got the value that I did out of this, I highly encourage you to share this out with someone that you think might need to hear it, whether it's just a friend, a family member, or again, throwing it up on your social media platforms. I highly encourage you guys to share it out as well, as we're trying to build our community and collective together. I'm Nick Troutman signing off, wishing you guys all an awesome day. Cheers.